Good day. Uh, this is Dr. Tom, my colleague Michael Dallen, and we are here on the Dragon Saying podcast. And behind Michael, you'll see his wonderful book, The Rainbow Covenant, which I encourage you to read. And this is also our book, Dragon Slaying, about recovering from trauma and manifesting your heroic self. So we are approaching the third anniversary of a very seminal, transformative speech in the history of our country. And Michael, what was that?
Hundreds ago, it's a Lincoln speech.
I bet it was, yes, and it occurred someplace in Pennsylvania, as I recall.
The Gettysburg Address.
Oh,
really?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right. But I wanted just to read the opening passage of that to see if there's any contemporaneous application to this.
There always is.
Okay.
It's like reading the Bible.
7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Note, all are created equal, but not all men are destined to equal outcome, which is the distinction between Lincoln, Jefferson, and the social justice movement advancing equity. He went on, we were engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. And I would argue at the present time we are also engaged in a great civil war in behalf of the principles that founded this country. And I guess my first question to you, Michael, as my most esteemed and most loved biblical scholar, when you advance the Noahidic laws, do you measure cultures or civilizations in terms of how they adhere to those Noahidic laws?
Absolutely. It's a terrific benchmark. It's a very handy metric to see, to apply to an individual and a culture and a society and an ethnic group. You know, some people are exemplary and some people are not. And you see, I see failing societies all over the world and failing ethnicities all over the world. And people, and I bring it home to a failure to adhere to the universal law, basic laws that apply to all men and women, of course. But, we were taught, you and I were talking about different political things. And I remember, I was reading an obit for a local congresswoman who died, and she was the mother of our extremely corrupt mayor, who was doing for his corruption and perjury and oppressive conduct. President Trump pardoned him, and he would have been doing another 17 years or so in federal prison. But he sucked up to Trump, brown-nosed him, and Trump saw a fellow ganaf, you'd say in Yiddish and in Hebrew. Well, ganav is the Hebrew for thief and thievery.
Elaborate on that definition, because we've heard the term a lot.
Well, we're talking about the Noahide law against thievery, ganav, and this is something.
So ganaf is a transliteration for ganab, thievery?
Ganav is the Hebrew, and ganaf, is the Yiddish, the vernacular. But if you're in Israel and you call somebody a ganaf, everyone knows what you're talking about. But he was and is a ganaf. I know his current wife, not the horrible woman that he was married to, but the new horrible woman he's married to. But I was looking at her pedigree.
Michael, excuse me, we have a wide audience. Have you protected yourself given these remarks?
Yeah, I'm armed.
But you haven't named the individual, so that's good.
Well, I'm armed, and most of them are dead, and those who aren't are, they know, they've been around, and they've been insulted before. But I was looking at her obituary, and her son did prison time, her husband did prison time. And then we were looking at some of her predecessors, and it's a fact that some of our black politicians in America are just terrific and just the most noble, selfless public servants that there are, but a whole lot are not. And this comes down to this wrinkle in black culture. That you were in Niger, and I'm sure you saw it, and I've seen it all over in the black world, of people who, when they're elevated to high office, feel that the ordinary rules that apply to rank and file don't apply to them anymore. The rank hath its privileges, and that they feel a great entitlement. So in her
could also
family,
say that, in fairness, just for a moment, and that is that, I've often viewed the blanket application of innocence and entitlement to any particular ethnic group as itself a form of racism.
of course, yeah. Well,
White people are corrupt. Jewish people can be corrupt. Witness Bernie Madoff, Jeffrey Epstein, and some black people can be corrupt too. We're not immune from corruption.
Human is human, right? No, these laws are for human beings, and we are prone to err. Mistakes happen, but there are cultural wrinkles that affect people. We're people of our past and our ancestors, and I think when you look at the record of Jewish politicians in America, you see people coming from a people whose Torah, whose marching orders instruct that the King of the universe, God, judges those who are in high places with more criticism, more critically, then they must live up to higher standards morally, that they must refrain from self-interested dealing. And you have other cultures that don't teach that at all, but instead teach that rank hath its privileges. So, we've had these darling Jewish politicians, leaders. Politicians is one of, a very noble calling. A leadership is a very, very noble calling. And we've had very, very noble people. I'm thinking of Merrick Garland, who is Jewish and served as Attorney General, who was self-effacing and self-restricting to a fault. He wanted the Justice Department to be far, far, far above politics when it wasn't really possible. But he tried, and it made him an ineffective Attorney General. But I was looking at Carolyn Cheeks Kilpatrick's record and that of these other black politicians. And we've had plenty of crooked white politicians. I remember during World War II, Detroit had this mayor who, you could never see this mayor's name without the word pompous attached to it. And, and he ended up in a Michigan prison, for self-dealing, for crookedness.
Who was that mayor?
I can't remember the name, but pompous. If you look up pompous Michigan governors, you're going to come up with...
Was it governor or mayor?
Governor. No, pardon me. You're right. He was a Detroit mayor, and he was a crook. And he didn't die in prison, but he came close to dying in prison, where he belonged. The record of these different black politicians in Detroit makes you glad that we have an institution, a federal institution like the FBI, to keep them honest. The federal system is a pretty good system. I'm very impressed with the way our system works, so that we're not all Mississippi, and we're not all Utah, and we're not all, at times, Detroit, where we've had these politicians with this different ethical code, this ethos of, if it ain't chained down, it's mine. We hope to do better than that.
So are you attempting to mobilize a cheer for Los Angeles right now?
I don't know that we need to get in.
Michael, let me bring it home to where I think what we're learning is, and forgive me, my honors thesis as a historian before I went to medical school was on revolution. And there seems to be a pattern that in many revolutions, French, Russian, and many contemporaneous revolutions, the cruelty of the establishment, which no establishment can be without flaws, is overthrown, only in most instances to be replaced by the cruelty of the successors. With one exception, if you compare the American and the American French and Russian Revolution. The principles of both the French and the Russian Revolution ultimately risked being executed by their own co-revolutionaries. It was only the American Revolution where the principles survived because I believe that the Constitution was anchored in Noahidic law. Would you comment on that?
Well, given that there was a lot of violence and there was cruelty in the American Revolution too, but it was like listening to soft music compared to the French and certainly the Russian revolutions. But yeah, you were dealing with John Adams, a founding father, a revolutionary founding father who brooked no opposition, but who was Abigail and John Adams were just terrific people.
Michael, forgive
Very
me.
pious.
Could you move closer to your camera or just, yeah, that's great.
They were really genuinely pious people. And I remember, what was his line? Do I have it handy? Our revolution, our government, our Constitution is designed only for a religious and pious people. It's totally unsuited for any other people. Americans were biblically informed. I mean, you had a Protestant culture, completely unlike Russia and France, and they really, they were all those people were shaped by biblical religion. But the Protestants here in America actually read the Bible. They believed in the Bible. Their manners were moderated by it, and they had an ethos, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant mostly ethos, that was like the British in some ways. I mean, some things just aren't done. Some things are just not fair. Informed by the Noahide laws. They didn't know what the Noahide laws were. Well, Walter Gropius did, the founder of international law, was familiar with the Talmud, the one little squib in the Talmud that talks about them. They
Lest we forget, they were anchored in both Old and New Testament scripture. And there is abundant reflection of the Noahidic laws in the Ten Commandments and many of the lessons.
Oh yeah, and even Acts in the New Testament
Yeah.
goes on about certain necessary rules, the things to stay away from. I don't know that our theist founders necessarily were ruled by that, but they were ruled by these principles that you don't murder people and you don't steal, and that it is
So
the obligation.
property was part of the rights of mankind, the right to the product
Absolutely.
of your.
They believed in private property and in the obligation of government, as it's the first obligation of government to protect private property. So they also believed in taxes, for instance, because you've got to protect private property, and those who have the most to protect have the biggest obligation to pay for the government that will protect them. Yeah, these were, the founding fathers, they were enormously tough people. I mean, they lived through all these diseases and things, but they were American in the best sense, I think. And there was oppressive violence. I mean, there was a lot of cruelty in the revolution. You had Ben Franklin's son, who was a Tory, or a pro-British man who was literally a terrorist. But he was confronting people, revolutionaries who were terrorists in New York State and New Jersey. And there were lynchings, there were hangings, and extrajudicial proceedings, but nothing like the Russian Revolution and nothing like the French Revolution. We got a good start, but the revolution really was a middle class revolution. You didn't really have a middle class in France, and you had less of a middle class in Russia. You had serfs and nobles, and with a little scrim of very rich capitalists and craftspeople, but it wasn't much. America really was in a much more egalitarian society. I remember de Tocqueville wrote his book about In America, Visit to America, He was coming through Detroit. He came right by Woodward and where I live. Michigan's main street is Woodward, and then it was, before it was named Woodward, it was just the old Pioneer Trail. It had been a cattle crossing, and then Indians used it, and it would take you up from the river into the hinterlands. And he's traveling up this route, and he's visiting these different homesteads, and he was saying these people are completely unlike French peasantry. He knew French peasantry. These people are not peasants. You go into their hovels, and they're working like mules, which is pretty impressive, for themselves. They're making a living, and you would find in them, there'd be a Bible, and there'd be Paul Bunyan's
I'm sorry. Paul Bunyan was the lumberjack. This is John Bunyan, I believe.
one Bunyan or another. I can't recall, but I remember it was Dr. Johnson who criticized it, was saying, no one ever wished it longer. But it was the daily reading of these these Michigan and Detroit pioneers, and then he would find a newspaper. You'd never find a French peasant with a newspaper, and they'd be Detroit Free Presses from, they'd be a few days late, but still they had newspapers, and they read them. So this, when you have a literate population, you don't have masses anymore. Not really. They're not masses. They're citizens.
So they valued education, they valued knowledge, and they valued enterprise, which is also unique in terms of our revolution. The founding fathers were largely very successful, enterprising people. Witness Ben Franklin and others.
Well, Franklin was like a Da Vinci, Leonardo kind of genius. I mean, you don't get too many like that, but yeah, they were very successful. And to his death, he called himself a printer. He was a retired printer. He didn't want any fancy designations like scientist or postmaster general or founding father, but printer. That's what I saw his tombstone not long ago in Philadelphia, and printer. But yeah, they were self-made, mostly self-made guys, and the women too they were really something. All literate, extraordinarily literate, and people mostly of regular habits who believed in our founding ethos. The main thing about the Noahide laws, I was thinking about it the other day, and it doesn't appeal to some people who don't have a background in the idea that people have free will, have an Asian religious background of this life, or Indian background of this life not being real, that all is illusion. The Noahide laws is based on man is made in the image of the deity, which is to say, however you feel about the deity or his image, that every individual human being is precious and infinite, and that life is real. The king of the universe, that God feels the pain of animals, that he feels, he is sensitive to the pain of animals, and he doesn't want his human creations causing them unnecessary harm or suffering. And the same with the other laws, that life is real, that you don't play around with government. You have an obligation. Every man, at least, has an absolute obligation to work to sustain justice and government. That's the Noahide commandment against anarchy. So we're all obligated, but there's that basic structure there. Whether or not you know what all seven are or the details of the seven, you come away with that. The first thing is life is real. God is real. Man is real.
Michael, one of the things that I've identified that is inherent and important to Jewish culture, and I think in many ways to Judeo-Christian culture, is to leave this world a better place than we found it. Where did that emerge from, that commitment?
Well, a lot of Christians don't have that. I've been struck by that again and again. And recently, for instance, these people who feel that, well, this world is just screwed and it's time for us to go.
A lot of Christianity emerged in behalf of leveraging the hereafter, as opposed to the suffering in the present time. And that may have been a distraction. But, I think there's
Yeah.
certainly a fair number of Christians who are charitable and give back and inspire
Oh, absolutely. Oh,
and
yeah.
the foundational energy of the abolitionist movement.
Well, there's a tremendous amount in Protestantism towards making this world an earthly garden. I remember in the Reformation and the Great English Revolution of 1688, you had these Protestant bishops who worked with Oliver Cromwell, and they were being castrated and punished, and and in the Restoration. But they tried under Cromwell to institute heaven on earth, and they really thought they had it going. They translated. Tyndale had translated Deuteronomy, the book of Deuteronomy in the Bible, the Torah, the fifth book of the Torah, into English finally, and they could read it. And they reformed the British laws. I mean, they radically reformed the British laws. They took away all these horrible medieval precepts involving trial by ordeal, or the Baroque punishments of pouring molten metal into people's orifices. Horrible, horrible things that you don't even want to think about. And they themselves were subject to these ghastly punishments in the Restoration by Good Time Charlie. Good Time Charlie came in because these good, well-meaning Protestant theologians, and lawgivers, regarded to this day as some of the great, like Cromwell, as some of the greatest Englishmen of all time. But they didn't like.
You made reference to Good Time Charlie.
Good Time Charlie, Charles, yeah. Well, he was Prince and then King Charles II, and he brought in the Restoration, which, they kept a lot of the new laws, but they abolished the Cromwell's people's dour Puritanism, the banning of dancing, bans on music, bans on gambling, bans on, all these old-time pagan things that they used to do, like dancing around the maypole, and they regarded that stuff as just pure paganism, and they tried to eradicate it. So no plays, Good Time Charlie came in, and they had plays again, and dancing and music and dancing around the maypole and all of that.
Yeah, I think there are certain fundamentalist sects out there that one needs to be particularly cautious about premature sexual intimacy because it might lead to dancing.
That's the joke, right? Guy goes to the rabbi. Look, my wife with his wife, nice. Look, Rabbi, tell us what we could do. Can we do dancing? Absolutely not. Well, can we have sex this way or that way or this way or the other? Absolutely. It's a great mitzvah, wonderful thing, a connection with God, a man and a maid. What's better than that? Can we have sex standing up? Absolutely not. Why? It might lead to dancing. Right. Well, dancing is problematic. But these wonderful guys, they're desire was, in their own words, to bring heaven to earth, to get away from the strictures of medieval times and to bring justice to earth, to rid mankind of the scourge of oppressive government and robbery and license, all the pathologies that make human society in misery and that keep people from happiness.
So what happened to that English Revolution?
Well, the people got tired of their self-righteous priggishness, the no dancing, the no plays, the no music, the no dancing around the maypole. They were good and sick of it. Charlie was no gambling, so Charlie was called Good Time Charlie. With the restoration of the monarchy, after Cromwell and the Parliament, they brought royalty back. But more importantly, now you could go and do Morris dancing, whatever that is, and folk dancing and things like that. And you could gamble, and you could go and see plays and dance. So that brought it down until eventually the English tossed out that autocratic king, and well, you had better kings, You you began to get the Georges, and they were not, and they were dependent on Parliament. Again, you had the tax power, and the commons of England, and these are the nobles and the rich, decided they didn't want any more autocratic, imperious rulers, and they were going to rein in the kings. So that's what happened. So that gave us the government of George III eventually, from which we rebelled. I was looking at something where they were talking about Italian Jews being remarkably effective. There were many more French Jews, but they didn't leave a stellar record, mostly in France. While the Italian Jews were physicists, and they did all these great things. And American Jews also have spectacular record of achievement. Well, British Jews do not. And I was just thinking about that because, and one of the things was, in Britain, you had the society that depended on royal patronage. You had a few Jews who rose up. I mean, the Rothschilds and Disraeli, the great prime minister, but he had to convert to Christianity. His father did. You didn't have that in America. You really do have this place where there is some sense to the idea that anybody can be anything. And you never had anything like that in England, because you couldn't be anything. You were either born to the purple or you weren't, and the Jews weren't. So they were always, the only first-class citizens were the nobles and royals.
So as you observe contemporary American culture, which at its best can be creative, inventive, inspiring, all of these wonderful qualities, where do you see our path? Right now, it is apparent that we are going through significant political and social turmoil. But going back to the Noetic laws, where's our future going to be? By what principles can we live? Can we adhere to those principles that were how will I say it, and I know it's a term you don't really like, but anchored the organizing myth of the best angels of this country as we're proceeding toward the future?
Well, I believe in the Hebrew prophets, and the Hebrew prophets tell us that we all, mankind, including womankind, obviously. I hope that's not even necessary to say. That mankind will come under the wings of the Shekinah, of the divine presence. That men will know God's name. That they will come to appreciate the God of Israel is not just Israel's God, but that he has passionate love for anyone who turns to him. We are promised that we will have a unification of his name, which is to say that we will know him better, a lot better, despite the tendencies of the time that are just naturally, modernity is just naturally less pious and less conventionally pious than the past. I was reading a book by Walter Lippmann, writing in the 30s. And Walter Lippmann was one of these great, brilliant Jewish commentators who set the tone of an age. Like later, William Safire, Nixon's man, came up with nattering nabobs of negativism to put in the mouth of his Nixon's vice president. Walter Lippmann was this head and shoulders genius, and he's not, and he's a Reform Jew who really doesn't believe. He was raised that way, but he's an atheist. He can't believe in any kind of actual God. That God is a figment. But he was saying that people need a God that they can imagine, and if people can't imagine a God, that is to say, have an image of the God, then they don't have a God. And that when you have the arguments of religion that you must believe in a particular image of God, in a modern society, you run into hosts of people who don't. And you're told that you must, in order to be human, fully human, you must believe, in order to be a good person, you must believe in this particular version of deity or deities, of ultimate reality, or none. You'll run into people full spectra of beliefs who don't believe that way, but that you recognize to be good people. So that claim of religion just doesn't carry through. So there's a natural tendency of falling away from the old verities, the old religions. Yet this gives opportunity to the oldest of the religions, which of the real religions, which is the religion of Abraham, to come to the creator God of Israel. And I think it'll happen. And with that, there is this, that whether they believe or not, the religion of this God requires an open-mindedness, an openness, a freedom to believe whatever you want. It is not at all. It's the opposite of coercive. It is pure freedom. And I think our trajectory is towards greater freedom. And I believe that the only way to accomplish that greater freedom is to come under the sway of these divine principles that go back to almost to the pyramids, and to an appreciation of the role of the Jews in the world, and to the appreciation of the role of humanity in the world, that regardless of God's affection for the Jewish people, he has infinite affection for people of all stripes, whatever they are, depending on what they do. Our late cousin Nell was talking about my mother, my late mother, and she was comforting me after she died, and she was saying that my mother had this extremely rare capacity to love people with all her might and main and power, but that her great love for those close to her, whom she really loved, did not diminish the love that she could have for others. That she could love some people infinitely, but that she could love others infinitely. So that's a human being. That's my mom, your cousin Naomi. And
well, it appears
if
that
she could do that,
that's inspired your life. That seems your perspective on the world.
well, we're people of words, and we take words and ideas, and that help shape me. I was a middle-aged adult, an old lawyer at that stage when I heard that from Nell. But it got me thinking about God. There's this idea, it's unfortunate, but a lot of people feel that God couldn't have much delight in other people. They feel he's theirs, as it were, and they begrudge other people God's love. And that's pagan. That's making God over in your own image, which is the quintessence of paganism, inventing a God. But the logic of deity, of the philosophy of deity, of true religion, is that it's just a fact. We're constantly underestimating God. We're constantly delimiting him, and that his ability to love others is, despite his great love for, we're told, for Israel, is undiminished. And it's, people just have a tendency to begrudge others God's love, and it's not how it works.
Well, I think one of the challenges that seems to be eternal as you look at history is that there's as inevitability of our own biology. As we move into adulthood, there's a propensity for us to romanticize revolution for revolution's sake. And I can recall, even when I was at the University of Michigan, they glorified in having a few communist professors out there postulating what they were postulating. And we would read books like Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth, or others that when you really look at the logical consequences.
That was a new book then.
Yeah, right.
It was brand new.
And even contemporary times, Ta-Nehisi Coates. If you look at the logical consequence of that, and you look at it from the perspective of an oppressor and oppressed mentality, you're not left with much other than revolution and a need to destroy not only cruelty of the establishment, but everything that the establishment has done, which to me seems quite indiscriminate in its focus.
It's nihilistic, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, kids naturally are nihilistic. They want to toss aside everything that there was to make things new.
But I think it's important to ultimately get anchored in what has worked traditionally. And, when you read certainly the Old Testament, it will honor revolution if it is inspired by God and God's word. Witness Moses. But other revolutionaries are not treated terribly well in the Bible.
Well, we have all these counter-revolutionaries. I mean, that's the thing about the Torah. You have counter-revolutionaries, you have right-wing counter-revolutionaries, like the Party of the Golden Calf.
Right.
They want to return to Egypt. Good idea, And
But just basic stuff like Adam, Cain, and others, they're not really treated well.
well, I think they get what
Or
they
Satan,
deserve.
or Satan for that matter.
Well, we don't have Satan is the prosecuting angel, but he is God's servant. He's not an independent contractor. He just works for God. He gets a W-4, not a 1099. And but there he is. But he works with Hashem. I mean, we encounter Satan in the book of Job, and there he is, and he's under God's. It's a fantastic book. I mean, it starts with a discussion in God's heavenly court. Since when did human beings start eavesdropping on the discussions in God's heavenly court? So it begins with, that's mythic. There you got myth, okay? But we regard him as, I remember I was talking to this old rabbi, a teacher of mine, wonderful white beard, and I was going on about all the problems I was having with the First Covenant Foundation and with the book, and he was a fan, and he was saying, well, that's good. That means it's important because you're opposed by Satan, the prosecuting angel, Satan, So to have him pushing against you, crazy things would happen. We talk about the influence of Satan. The Jews are building the Mishkan, the shrine in the desert, and it takes a lot of work, and you got to card the wool to make the fabrics, and you got to fabricate the gold and collect it. But when it comes to building the golden calf, Aaron throws the gold into the fire, and out comes the calf. So that's how these things work. That's Hasatan in action. Revolution is what got me into religion. I hadn't realized, in your time, and then a little later in mine, we lived for revolution. I was asking this buddy of mine, in college, we'd have in the main liberal arts classrooms area, big, huge building, and there would be all these tables and chairs set up, and they were for people who had their own political agendas. And they were filled with people with, I think we talked about this before, they were filled with people who were Maoists or socialist labor or Stalinists or all these different communist revolutionary groups. And I was asking my buddy who went to Cooper Union and then Princeton, Bob, what happened to all those folks? Mike, don't you know? They all went into finance. But Torah is extremely revolutionary, and it's funny, too, because I have these rabbis who just despise Rainbow Covenant because I talk about the revolutionary quality of Torah and of the movement of the Jews. The Jews are a revolutionary people on earth. And that's one thing these people don't want to be a part of. I mean, the 20th century with its revolutions was mighty hard on the Jews, and they don't want to be associated with any darn revolutions. Enough. Genug. Thank you. So but on the other hand, you have to remember that we're not stayed either. The Jews are supposed to be a catalyst for progressive change. If it's revolutionary or if it's progressive, if it's incremental, the idea is to get to holiness and to obliterate human oppression and ignorance and all the things that make people less than they should be.
Michael, once again, thank you for your wisdom. I'd like to send out a teaser for next week. And one of the fascinating things about reading the Rainbow Covenant is you're appropriately honoring the sacrifice and the contribution of Moses as the prime author. And I'd like to go into that in more detail next week if we could.
Super.
About Moses, the oral tradition, and
super. Can't wait.
Torah. Okay.
Can't wait. Okay.
Until, are you looking forward to anything next week? Are we about to celebrate an arcane holiday that I don't even know about?
Yeah, I ran into somebody at the gym after all we have three and a half weeks of holidays, to mark the new year. And, we have this fall new year, and Jews have two new years, the solar calendar new year with the solar December 20th, and this one in the fall. And I ran into a good buddy of mine at the gym, and how do you feel, Jay? I'm tired. It just, the gloomy days were changed to standard time, I'm just freed from 3.5 weeks of holiday. Man, I'm not tired. I'm jazzed, and you are. You have a new birth of freedom, after all that, all those holidays. But no, nothing. This is the month of Mar Cheshvan, they call it, or bitter Cheshvan. And why is Cheshvan Mar or bitter? And Cheshvan was a Babylonian god that we don't, is obsolete as hell. But why is it bitter? Because no holidays. Well, most of us are just thrilled with holidays. We have Hanukkah coming up, and that's it, which is a great holiday, and it's rabbinic, and there's no cessation from work or play or music or anything. It's a good time. Charlie would approve of it.
Okay. All right, my friend. I very much appreciate this. And those of you who are out there in the audience, if you want to help support us, first of all, if you wish to sponsor us, you can catch us at drtom.author@gmail. And if you'd like to learn more about the Rainbow Covenant or dragon slaying, check out our books available at any book vendor. Fortunately, I haven't seen the Rainbow Covenant yet recirculate in a rare book sale, but I think it might help if the next time I come by Detroit that you autograph a copy for me.
Be my pleasure, but you can get it at some bargain rates on Amazon, I noticed.
Okay. All right, my friend.
Shalom.